Tanya. been the next. It's always been the next big thing. You know what I'm saying?
I think we're
Yo,
going.
what's up, everybody? What's up, everybody? We having some little chit and chatting back here behind the scenes. My name is Coolie Ranx. My name is Coolie Ranx. I'm your host for the night. We are in the Supernova Saturdays, the quarantine sessions. There's going to be a bunch of things happening here every Saturday. For now, we have a special guest, a longtime friend of mine. His name is Chris Murray.
What's up, everyone?
Yeah, what up? We're gonna see a couple of videos, have some Q&As, and then say goodnight. But for now, what's up, Chris?
Everything's good. This is fun. We got it going.
I think with a little bit of trial and error, things will go great. So you're our first experiment.
I'm the guinea pig.
Yeah, well, you know, somebody's got to do it. They got to sacrifice
Exactly.
something. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and how you got into the business.
Okay, so I grew up in Toronto, Canada, and I started a band actually in London, Ontario, where I was going to college in '87, called King Apparatus. And we were, at the time, I don't think the term third wave had been used yet. But as soon as it did, we knew we were part of it. I would say at the time we were, like most bands then, really influenced by Two-Tone, because we started in '87. I think Two-Tone was maybe that special AKA album got released in '84. It's only like a few years after, really. And we were like a hard rockin' ska band. We didn't have a horn section, but we had organ and electric guitar. So a lot of our inspiration was modeled on this sound, for sure. The upbeat, tough, rockin' sound. We tried to be tough.
When I was like, I think I was like 24 when I met you.
Wow.
Yeah.
I must have been around the same. Yeah.
So coming from that, how did you get into like the rock steady stuff, and you know, why did you leave that band first? And how did you get into the rock steady stuff?
Well, I would say I got into rocksteady before King Apparatus was even a band. So I grew up in Toronto, and a little factoid is, at least at the time, Toronto was the third biggest Jamaican community outside Jamaica after New York and London. So we had not only a lot of Jamaicans there and a lot of reggae music happening, we had some of the artists who emigrated out of Jamaica, like Leroy Sibbles was probably the most active member of the community, and he had Leroy Sibbles Band, and I knew him from playing, seemed like every month or every couple of weeks at the Bamboo Club, which was like the World Beats venue in Toronto. I just knew him as Leroy Sibbles from Leroy Sibbles Band before I'd ever heard of the Heptones.
Wow.
And there was a large enough community. This would be like the '80s and into the '90s, where there would be shows where the Jamaican community would bring people up from Jamaica for one show in Toronto, and then they'd go back. It wasn't part of any tour. So you could see these artists that were not really like touring acts. We'd get, the artists like Scatolites, as soon as they started to tour, or Toots, we'd get those artists, of course, because they would go everywhere. But other, we just had Bob Andy pass. I was saying I saw him, must have been 30 years ago, and it was a festival with probably 8 or 9 artists. Marcia Griffiths was also there, and they sang Always Together at that show. So I grew up in a city where Jamaican music it wasn't like you heard it on the radio every day, but it was around. And there were some local bands that had Jamaicans that were playing straight up reggae music. So it was a thing that wasn't so unheard of. When King Apparatus started touring out of Toronto and hitting other cities and going to Winnipeg and other parts of Canada, then we really understood, wow, okay, it's not like this everywhere. So I grew up, Two-Tone was the thing that introduced me to ska. And around the same time, I was hearing reggae. And it was a little while before I even understood what the connection between those things were. I mean, it was clear that some of what Two-Tone was doing was reggae. But at the time, Jamaican ska was really not very accessible, pre-internet, pre-CD. So nothing had really been reissued. I remember the very first time I heard authentic ska was Mango, which was a sub-label of Island, put out the first Intensified compilation, which had a ton of Scatolites. It had the James Bond theme. It had Justin Hines on it, Derek Morgan, Eric Morris, all these classic early era ska artists. And I, at the time, was a huge two-tone fan. So I had all the stuff that you could get that was two-tone. And there was no more ska out there, really. So I was in the record store one time and I saw Intensified Ska. And I said, wow, I'm taking this home. Yeah. And I'd never heard Jamaican ska. But I was like I thought, I'm a ska fan, you know? Because at the time, two-tone was ska. There was no difference in people's minds. And so I took it home and I put it on. And I was baffled. Like the sound of it, the old recording quality was one thing. I was like, wow, okay. And then the tempo was so slow compared to what I was used to hearing. Right. And then there were the aspects of like toasting that, you know, now I look back and I say, okay, that was happening a bit in two-tone as well. Like Ranking Roger or Neville were doing that kind of thing. But maybe Duck Soup was one of the tracks on Intensified, and the guy is just going out like pick it. And I'm like, what is this? Yeah. What is he doing? And so, literally at the time, to help myself understand it, I turned it on the phonograph from 33 to 45 RPM, and that brought it to a tempo where I'm like, wow, this is ska, okay, because it just was such a different thing from the ska that I knew. And so, as I was saying, like it took a while for me to really grasp the timeline of Jamaican music, because I came in at two-tone and also on the side reggae from what was happening in the moment. It wasn't like the history of reggae. It was Jamaicans making reggae in the 80s in my hometown. So I didn't see that. To me, two-tone, that was a British thing. And anyway, of course, at a certain time, I put it all together. So that's a long answer to how did I get into Rocksteady? I saw, Alton Ellis in Toronto in '89. The first time I saw Scatolites, they came to Toronto in 1990, and it was a double bill with Desmond Decker. Oh, so wow. That was the first time I saw either of those. And that show was at the concert hall, which I think had 12 to 1,500 capacity. It was pretty full, mostly Jamaican people there. So it was a great place for somebody who was really going to get into this music to grow up, because I was exposed to a lot of the artists that didn't really get to a lot of places. And I was able to see them in an audience of Jamaicans to really understand the feeling of all aspects of it,
Gotcha. That's great, man.
And so King Apparatus, we really, every band, well, not the Toasters, but every band except the Toasters usually has a day that it stops. And so I didn't really leave King Apparatus. It kind of like came to its conclusion. And I was already into old Jamaican music. And with King Apparatus, I was the guy in the band who was the least musically trained. I played trumpet in high school. I took 1 year of piano lessons when I was 6 and was bored silly with it and stopped. And then I picked up guitar. My father had given me a guitar when I was young, like 6. I didn't pick it up till I was 15. And I was like a summer camp counselor. And we're like doing King of the Road around the campfire, where you'd be there standing up, and there's a group of people, let's everybody sing along. So those skills, I have to say, that skill set from being a camp counselor is exactly what I do now. I'm standing on some box in a room saying, hey, everybody, let's sing along. But it's the song I wrote.
I got to tell you, when I saw you do that, I'm sorry to cut you. When I saw you leave from the band and you started going out on your own and doing it, I said, damn, this dude's crazy. I swear, I was like, this, because your band was so awesome. Your band was fire. It was so much energy and it was so high intense. You know what I mean? So then I was like, where's the band? I mean, you came to New York. The first time I saw you, you came to New York and you played in Wetlands, and you had it was just you and the guitar. I was like, what you doing?
So it wasn't a choice to leave the band to do the solo thing. It was more at the end of the band, we were a band where everybody was really contributing in various ways, and I was the leader. So I was doing the lion's share of the outside work, dealing with the agents and the label and the management and advancing the dates and being the tour manager. It was a lot of work. And making sure everybody else in the band's bills were paid. It was a lot. So at the end of that, I didn't really have the fire in me to put together a group and take on that responsibility for a lot of other people right away. And I'd been writing songs on my own for King Apparatus on acoustic guitar, and just the way I would introduce them, the song, I just played on the guitar, and then everybody would figure out what to do with that. And through that process, there were times where I borrowed a 4-track recorder from Mitch, the bass player. And that's when I started 4-tracking, because there were times where I didn't even have the vocabulary to say, oh, I want it more like this or like that. The only way but I could make the sound on an instrument. So I would make little demos to play to the band later on as some of the songs were getting a little more involved in the arrangement. And that way I could just say, this is what I'm hearing. This is the sound I'm looking for. And people are like, oh, we get what you're doing. Because I just didn't have the vocabulary to say, even be more on top of the beat, or less, lay it back, or I want it swing or straight time. I didn't even know those terms at the time. I learned them along the way. So when King Apparatus started, I was already making 4-track recordings, and a song like Rocksteady was introduced, and also So Many Roads. King Apparatus was playing those tunes in our set because they were just new tunes I'd written. And we were always trying to be broad in the way we approach ska. I'll say it that way. So as we got around more, and especially when we came out to California and saw the bands out here that were playing authentic style in a very direct way. I would say on the East Coast, a band like Scofflaws was kind of old school, more influenced by the 60s than the Toasters, but still very third wave. Like they would cover an old tune, but it'd be upbeat and everybody's, skanking hard. Where out here, the bands were like, we're really like laying it down, trying to sound exactly like the old recordings, being super authentic. So coming out here helped me to see bands play in that authentic sound. So was a stepping stone towards me writing a song like Rocksteady, where we would bring it in and play it with King Apparatus. And it sounded, not like when I'm doing a solo acoustic, it sounded like King Apparatus doing it, but still it was our version of Rocksteady, which might have been like Scofflaw's version of authentic ska. It was, but it wasn't authentic exactly.
Okay.
So all these things happen in that way.
I want to jump to one of your videos and let the people hear what you sound like and what it is that you actually do. And we'll come back and we'll throw some more questions at you, okay?
Perfect.
I appreciate you, bro.
What's up? All right, welcome to the first Supernova Saturday online gig. My pleasure, my privilege, my honor to be the first performer in the series. And without further ado, we do the ska. All we do is waste our time. At least if you ask our neighbors, you never see me in a factory line, sitting and pushing paper. Yeah, we do the ska. Yeah, we ska. Yeah, we ska. We do the ska. Yeah, we ska. Yeah, we ska. We do the ska. Yeah, we ska. Yeah, we ska. The ska is all we need. Headed for the big time. Ready to face our vultures. Signing on the dotted line. Deciding to raise our culture. Yeah, we do the ska. Yeah, we ska. Yeah, we ska. We do the ska. Yeah, we ska. Yeah, we ska. We do the ska. Yeah, we ska. Yeah, we ska. The ska is all we need. The deeper the water, the cooler the stream, thicker the lumber, the stronger the beam. Now Rudy come lately, oh over the scene, trading the black and white for green. Yeah, cause you don't know what it means. Yeah, we scout to the sky. Yeah, we scout. Yeah, we scout to the sky. Yeah, we scout. Yeah, we scout to the sky. Yeah, we scout. Yeah, we scout. The sky is all we need. No voice from the tower can tell me what's real. Bring your own honor, so honor the real deal. Stay would take you to the moon if you would only change your tune. Waving a mighty dollar sign, you paid and hooked that bottom line. But now we say goodbye to greed, because with life is so easy. So red stripe and collie weed. Yeah, the sky is all we need. Yeah, we scout to the sky. Yeah, we scout. Yeah, we scout to the sky. Yeah, we scout. Yeah, we scout to the sky. Yeah, we scout. Yeah, we scout. The sky is all we need. Yeah, we scout to the sky. Yeah, we scout. Yeah, we scout to the sky. Yeah, we scout. Yeah, we scout to the sky. Yeah, we scout. Yeah, we scout. The sky is all we need. Yeah, we scout. All right. All right. Nice. So we are off to a good start, I think. Everyone feeling good? Nice. So these days we are all at home, cooped up, hopefully getting out for walks and, you know, not fully cooped up, but we are in quarantine, all of us. And it's a heavy thing. So I'm just gonna send this out to all of us, because I think love is what we need right now. It's called A Little Bit of Love. Day by day, we're on our way. Step by step, just moving forward down the road that lies ahead. Where we're going, we don't know. It's time to go, and don't look back. We got everything we need, indeed. Yes, our bags are packed. All right, here's what we're bringing, a little bit of heart, 'cause we're gonna make a start, and a little bit of soul, 'cause now we're on a roll. Yes, a little bit of love, goes a long, long way. Tell me why, when I look around me, what I see is everybody just living for themselves, chasing the almighty dollar bill. Oh, I know they will kill a man and think they've made a profit, stealing from their brothers. They're just stealing from themselves, like they don't know we're in this thing together, in this thing together now, in this world together, and a little bit of heart. We say we're gonna make a start, and a little bit of soul. We say now we're on a roll. Yes, a little bit of love, goes a long, long way. Is it too much to ask for? Is it too much to dream? Too much of fantasy that everybody will take care of one another? Only one way to see, and that's if we get together. if we get together now, if we get together, so can we get together with a little bit of heart? We say we're gonna make a start and a little bit of soul. They say now we're on a roll, yes, a little bit of love, goes a long, long way, yeah, goes a long, long way, yeah. Sure does. All right, so these days everybody's at home live streaming, which is awesome. I'm not taping this, so I'm not live streaming it, but I'm gonna do one next week, I think on Thursday. And I think also I'm gonna call it Blue Beat live stream. So check for that. I'm gonna put up some promo and stuff and play for about an hour, do like a bunch of stuff, maybe some surprises, some caps lock stuff, some co-writes that you guys maybe haven't heard before. I'm gonna do one right now called Food and Shelter. As a little surprise. Send this out to my good friend Atsushi from New Zealand, from Japan, who's like a vagabond ska minstrel. We wrote this together a while back. In the time of our ancestors, a time of earth and sky and water, lived the hunter and the farmer, a simple life of food and shelter, food and shelter. And every day was the day, and we were in it all the way, as the sunlight brought the day, moonlight brought night. All we needed was food and shelter, food and shelter. Got to have food and shelter. What is lost and what is gained, when what is faded does not remain. Lived the hunter and the farmer, a simple life of food and shelter, food and shelter. Got to have food and shelter, got to have food and shelter, food and shelter. Indeed. So I hope you enjoyed that. And I'm gonna finish off with one I know you've heard before, and I know you're gonna feel it in a different way today, because I'm gonna do home, and I think a lot of people watching this right now are at home. So spin it however you need to do, and I'll see you soon. Healthy, safe, be responsible, and we're gonna be okay. I've raised the dust on 10,000 streets, worshipped the earth with the soles of my feet. I've rolled around all the days of my life, headed for someone, somewhere to arrive. I want to go home, I want to go home, I want to go home, but home has gone away. Young head foolish, young heart unwise, I left my home for the world outside. Much too late, I realized my home was always in your eyes. I want to go home, I want to go home, I want to go home, but home has gone away. I'm here one minute, then the next I'm gone. When I get that feeling, then I'm moving on. Don't feel much like hanging around, 'cause what I'm looking for I ain't found. I want to go lights, they smell so sweet and they shine so bright. There's so much in this world to see, and every place is calling me, but I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home, but home has gone away. I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home, but home has gone away. All right, Supernova Saturday. Rock on.
Oh, we're back. Okay, I just
Right.
sanitized my hands.
So I want to say to everybody, we're like talking on Zoom on our phones and also looking at the Facebook pages on our laptops. And so the way it is, we're seeing 4 comments at a time, and we can't figure out how to scroll up and down. So now we started to realize we're keeping our eyes on your questions. Now we're in the Q&A section, and there was a question that I wanted to respond to. Someone asked, where did the Venice Shoreline Chris name come from, and where did it go? So when I first started transitioning in life to Los Angeles, I was pretty transient, and at the time, Venice was the neighborhood that I really ended up hanging out in. It's a good place when you're just getting here, beachy, and a lot of transients, especially in the early 90s, where you didn't feel like out of place for being transient. So anyway, I was living in the garage of a house where 3 girls were living in the house and somehow ended up in the garage, which was a cool zone for me. And it was a real trip, I have to say. Like, for a guy from Canada, at the time, in maybe 94 was when I was in that garage, the crack epidemic residue was still very strong in the neighborhood, and the gangs were really present, and nothing comparable to this existed in my experience in Canada, period. I toured around America with King Apparatus a lot, and clubs are often downtown or in an urban zone, and you see all of the stuff that you see, but to live in it was a different reality. And so one of the girls in the house was doing, her job was kind of social work, and she was working with kids in the neighborhood. So she had a lot of experience with the graffiti. She understood what stuff on the wall meant, and to me, I didn't at all. So VSLC was the tag for Venice Shoreline Crips, who were they were the black gang in Venice. And so we're walking around, she's pointing out graffiti to me, telling me what it is. And she said, oh, that's Venice Shoreline Crips. And right off of that, I just kind of spun, oh, Venice Shoreline Chris. And so it was kind of a joke. And it was cool because to me, I also like old blues. Like, so you hear like Memphis Slim or Mississippi John Hurt, whatever, all these people with a place name and their name. So at the time, I was like hanging out in Venice, and I'm like, so to me, in that moment, I became Venice Shoreline Chris, because in my life, all of a sudden, here I am. I'm living in a garage in this neighborhood where stuff is going off. And so that's where the name came from. And when I actually became more stable and a resident of Los Angeles in life, I felt like, okay, it was a good joke at the time, and it really represented that part of my life. But it's a thing that some people don't take as a joke at all. And so, if people put that on the wall to claim turf, and they're hardcore people, and you want to start calling yourself Venice Shoreline Chris, you might be asking for some trouble you don't even understand. And now you live there, and you got an address, people can find you. And so that's why I dropped it, because I thought in the long run, literally, it's safer. And at that point, I was no longer in Venice. I was living in West Hollywood, was the next place I landed in LA. So those were the reasons I passed. And I thought in the long run, just using my name was also like a beneficial thing. And that came from also the experience of King Apparatus, where we had built the brand of King Apparatus. People didn't talk in those terms back then, but we had an original member leave, and at that point, we felt like it's not going to be the thing that it was. So we didn't want to try to call a thing that it wasn't going to be anymore King Apparatus. It didn't feel right. So I learned from that experience, if I'm really going to build a brand, build my own brand. So even when I have a group with me, I call it Chris Murray Combo, and it's not like we're the this or that or others, because as long as I'm there with people, it can be Chris Murray Combo. It can be 7 people. It can be 3 people. It's all good. And it doesn't have to be this person and that person, because I didn't want to build a brand that depended on other people when I have had the experience as a band leader. Well, people come and go. And that's kind of a long answer to the question about Venice Shoreline Chris, the name, where it came from and where it went.
We spoke about how you transitioned from the kind of two-tone, harder, hyper music into the rock steady stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So you're like myself. You're coming from 2 worlds, right? How do you see it now that it's kind of like isolated? Like, I don't see it like how it used to be. Remember, like how it used to be? Everybody played with each other. There was no separation like that.
Right.
But now it seems like there's just like this. I only listen to rock steady. I don't listen to anything else. That's not ska. What you said about that?
I think that really came as a matter of the times, where I know what you're saying. In the early 90s was when bands like Hepcat really came up. I think maybe 92 or 93 was when the first Hepcat album came out, and a year or two
when I first saw it.
Okay. And that California Skyquake compilation was really key at showing, I think it introduced a lot of people, even me, to the fact that there were bands in California playing authentic style. When I heard that Jump with Joey track, El Diablo Ska, that was on that thing, blown away. I'm like, there's a band that sounds like this that plays today. And the first time King Apparatus came to LA, we had a day off, and Jump with Joey had a residency at the King at the time. So I remember it was January 93. I got to see Jump with Joey play, and I'm like, wow, this is like another level of people playing authentic stuff. But at the time, even though in Southern California, there was a real thing starting. There were at least a dozen bands by that time playing straight up authentic stuff. It wasn't a big enough scene for that to separate away. If those bands were going to play, they were going to play with the other bands that were active, who were, taking their inspiration from two-tone, or out here, especially from the Untouchables or Operation Ivy to a certain degree, although not as much in Southern California at the time, but maybe Voodoo Glow Skulls, some of the really veteran third wave bands were really bringing it hard. Bands like Skeletones, especially.
Skeletones.
So all these bands would be playing together because there wasn't enough of a scene for the rocksteady thing to become its own thing yet, and it was pretty new. It was weird for people when I got on stage with an acoustic guitar, but when you think about it, that's like one of the most basic presentations of music there is. It's like not that mind-blowing, and it's not that mind-blowing when a band is playing authentic Jamaican music to us now, but at the time it was like, wow, this is a strange thing. So even for the ska scene here at the time, it was a new thing. And I remember
it was new everywhere.
Yes, the main promoter at the time in the 90s in LA for the rocksteady scene was the Steady Beat, with Luis Correa was the guy. And when I first got out here in 93, he was doing shows at Hong Kong Cafe, which was downtown in Chinatown. And he was the guy that really, I would say, built in LA the rocksteady scene into what it was. But in those early shows, it was, like I said, it wasn't big enough yet to have become its own thing. And I remember seeing on one of those bills where there were maybe like C Spot or Ocean 11, but Mustard Plug was in town and they were on the bill. And it was like, it wasn't cats and dogs, it was cats and elephants, or dogs and giraffes. But that's how those shows were at the time.
Yeah.
And Tommy from Allenton's, I saw his old band Catch 22, and they were like trying to be two-tone. Later, that band stopped. He started the Allentons, which is like, now we're authentic sounding. So there was a evolution that was happening out here. And I know in other places, if you tried to start an old school band, there was no other old school band to play with, period. You're going to play with whatever bands there were. But at a certain time, definitely, there were enough bands and enough people had gotten turned on to that music. Part of it was CDs became the new medium. And because that meant everything from Beatles to whatever was getting reissued. Oh, we have to reissue Hotel California on CD because we can. And at this point, a lot of older Jamaican music started to get reissued either by Studio One or Heartbeat or other companies that would license old masters. So the old recordings became accessible in a way they had not been. Before, you needed to find a piece of vinyl, and there was no internet. There's no eBay saying, hey, I've got it, you want it?
Mm-hmm.
There was no catalog saying, this is everything that got put out in Jamaica in the 60s. You really had to know someone who had some records. It was a real grassroots type of thing. Like I met some people with great record collections, and that was the thing that stopped me collecting records, because I'm like, as long as I know this guy, I don't need to be trying to collect pieces of vinyl, because I'm on the move a lot. It's hard to carry vinyl around. But so yeah, I would say that was a really great time in the early 90s for ska, in that there were so many different sounds happening. And that was when you were out there with the Toasters Hardcore and seeing around the country how many approaches to ska that were being done.
Yeah, there's some great bands out there.
Like incredible
bands that still haven't gotten the recognition of what they was doing. That's like every district, every section had their own sound, which was like unique to that area. DC, you had Motown ska from the High Tasters.
Yeah.
I mean, things like that.
I definitely remember Midwest had its own sound. There were even like I remember like Midwest bands, they'd be like Fast and Furious, and then they'd have a breakdown where it'd be like, hey, and everybody's like jumping up and down.
Yeah.
I always associated, that's a band from the Midwest because they have this breakdown. Yeah. And, in those pre-internet days, the way things got, one thing influenced another was really had to be face to face. Like a band came to your town and you saw them, something. You don't even know what it was. Oh, like they had some great harmonies. Let's work on our harmonies. Or the horn stuff was great. Let's work on that. And I think that those early third wave bands really did a great service to ska, because I remember, say with King Apparatus, we were fortunate to have a strong ska scene early on. And we had especially this one DJ, Derek Stevens, who was the guy who made things happen. He would promote shows. He must have promoted Toaster shows for you guys. And so what am I trying to say? It was, for us, a real important learning thing for a band like the Toasters or Bim Scala Bim to come to Toronto, because literally you guys were the top level ska band we'd ever seen. I was just a little too young to see the two-tone bands in their original era. They came around, but I was, 14, 13, and I wasn't going to concerts yet. So when I saw the Toasters, that was probably one of the first times I would see a professional touring act that was a ska band. And you guys were seasoned, even in the early days, to a level that other bands we were seeing, there's a band from Kingston or from Ottawa or from Montreal, or somebody came all the way from Vancouver. But that was like, they made it once to Toronto or something. So when we saw bands like Toasters, that really showed us like, this is the level we have to be at to be playing in this scene with these bands. And I would say Toasters were really helpful to King Apparatus they gave us a lot of comradeship or assistance. And through Moon Records, we were having our music come out in America, and we would do touring with the Toasters around America, which was great because we were fortunate. As a Canadian band, there's good support for the arts in Canada. There's a lot of government grants and that type of thing that if you're doing something that's connecting a bit, you can get help to get more traction. So it wasn't, even back then, it wasn't to get across the board to play. You had to have some paperwork done. We had to be union members to get the paperwork done to come into the US for a long time. And it was easier to drive around Canada. The exception being the distances are huge and the cities aren't that big. You know, there are more people live in California than in Canada, and Canada is huge. Yeah, it's crazy. But we had been able to be a full-time touring band in Canada before we really started to get touring in the US much. So we'd gotten seasoned driving 8 hours from Winnipeg to Saskatoon, which might have 200,000 people in Saskatoon, because that's the next city. Yeah. And we played a lot. So when we got down into the US with the Toasters, we'd actually built our thing up, and it really put us in front of people in a great way, because Toasters and Moon Records and Bucket had really built the US ska scene, even in 91, to a point where there was something going on that 3 years before had not been going on. And 3 years later, like 94, 95, it was really popping, and stuff was starting to happen at a different level, where Rancid would have Time Bomb on the radio, and Sublime was starting to pop, or No Doubt. Although maybe they weren't playing ska the way they had been, a lot of people who got into ska through being No Doubt fans were now seeing No Doubt, Tragic Kingdom. It's like top 10 stuff. And so the awareness of ska in the eyes of young people in America, North America, was really changing rapidly over, I want to say 94 to 96 was things exploded.
Yeah, because our audience back then was more skinhead and rude boys. You know what I mean? It wasn't so much college kids. It wasn't skaters as much. It kind of just morphed into something else and opened up.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
It became mainstream in its way. Yes, what's up?
We got another
John's
question.
letting us know about a question.
What's the question, John?
No, I don't think that there was.
Oh,
okay. Okay, so John's letting us know someone asked the question, when I sent my cassette to Moon, did I send it to other labels? And my answer is no, because at the time, I don't think there were other labels that were, I wouldn't have even known. Jump Up must have been around at the time. Fortunately, it worked out with Moon. So
you know who was around? Wax was around those times. I remember we went to California and we met this guy. I didn't know who the dude was at the time, but yeah, he was one of those Rancid dudes. They had the label, and we went into some beach hunt thing, and it was just had all these records up there. I was like, oh,
okay.
I was a novice to the whole thing, so please don't count my experiences as anything other than just some kid coming from the hood, exploring the world.
So I want to ask you, I know you're the host, but I want to ask you, when you grew up in London, so you were seeing the two-tone bands in the original era? No.
I was born in England. I left at the age of 7 going on 8. My introduction to ska was the Toasters.
Ah, okay.
What I knew as ska was the Jamaican stuff, but I always thought that was reggae. I never equated it, or I knew that it had a different name other than reggae. So I knew all of that music, but to me, that was just reggae. So until I came into the Toasters, that's when I learned, oh, this is ska. And my godfather's like, it's not ska, it's ska. So
you're right.
Yeah, it's not ska. Shout out to Computer Poor, but he would tell you it's not. Yeah, man, that's what it is. That's my No more questions about me. Let's get back to you.
So yeah, basically the answer to that was no. I just brought it to Moon, and in the end, it worked out with Moon. So there was no need to look any further, and that was great.
That was the only game in town, actually,
and it was really key.
Yeah, it was key. I mean, they
John's
put
letting us know
everybody in.
about another question.
Okay, John, fire the question. Don't interrupt. That's you, Chris.
Let me. Okay. So the question is, any up and coming bands? Am I into any up and coming bands these days? And the first thing that comes to mind, there's a band in LA, Steady 45s, and the drummer Fritz, he plays with me in the current version of Combo, and we've been playing together now. It must be like 6 years. And when we first started jamming, Steady 45s were really just starting to get it going, and they didn't even have the name yet. So I was at the first show where they like announced, oh, and now we're Steady 45s. I don't know what they called themselves before, if they had a name or not. But so that's a band that really has put a lot of work into developing their sound and getting great and doing the hard work, because it's a lot harder than it used to be, I think, of getting in a van, a crappy van that's going to break down, and driving hours to some other city in some other state to make not a lot of money. And gas is not like 80 cents a gallon anymore. Because when we went around in the early 90s, gas was not crazy expensive like it is. And that's a major expense when you're driving across the country.
Yeah.
So that's the first band that comes to mind that I really get excited about. And they've worked hard, as I said, for a long time. And they were always making demos and recordings. And Fritz would give me the stuff like, hey, this is what we just did. And some of it I was really digging. They were always, in my mind, my impression of it, they have a high bar. What they accept is good enough for them to put out. And they were doing more and more stuff that was sounding, I want to say, like studio, more produced than some rehearsal tapes that were being made. Where I grew up listening to old Jamaican music, where it was, okay, there was a wrong note, not the end of the world. If it sounds cool, if the vibe's right, and the sound quality's not pristine, no problem. It sounds rough, and I like that. So at a certain point, I'm always asking, like, well, how's it going with that album? Because it was like a couple of years they're working on the album, and oh yeah, we're working on it. And I got the sense that some of the stuff that I loved the most, they had kind of moved beyond. They thought, that's our early stuff. We're hitting it harder than that. But for me, that was the stuff I would listen to. So I really had to sell them to do a release. So I have a little small label called Unstrictly Roots. Mostly I'm the artist. I've done a couple things for other artists, but I don't do a lot because I feel like I don't have a lot to offer an artist, as far as I don't have distribution or a big promotion team. But once in a while, an artist comes along that I'm like, I really want to do something with and for this artist. And so I had to really sell Steady 45s to release some of their early stuff, which we put together as a release called Greenleaf Special. Their rehearsal space was on a street in Whittier called Greenleaf. And of course, it had that herb resonance as well. Sounded right for a reggae-related band. And it was just very true to what they were. So the stuff I liked most at the time of the recordings they had were rehearsal things. They had a nice big space, and I would go just to hang out with them when they were rehearsing because it sounds good. And then later, they kind of became the band, the go-to band in town to back the older Jamaican artists who would come. For a long time, it was Expanders would be the go-to band to back Leonard Dillon or Alton Ellis or whoever was coming. And then they kind of passed the torch to the Delirians. And then Delirians eventually passed the torch to Steady 45s, who I think probably are still the go-to band for if, Derek Morgan or someone were to come to town. They would be the thing. So I'd also go down and see them do rehearsals. They backed Pat Kelly and Carlton Patterson from Carlton and the Shoes, a bunch of other artists. I'm spacing on the names right now, just in their rehearsal space. So these recordings I was hearing of them jamming in their rehearsal space, it was exactly what I wanted from them, because I would go down to that very room and hear exactly that sound being created live, just because that was the thing that was turning me on. So long story short, Steady 45s is the new band that I'm most stoked about. And I'm going to leave it there because if I start naming other people, I'm going to leave out others.
I got a question. And I know you said gas, right? A lot of the bands from the West Coast don't come over to the East Coast. Is that because of the gas, or is it just that they don't want to? They can tour in California all they want and not have to worry about the East Coast.
Well, I can't really speak on behalf of other bands for what they're thinking in that regard. I do know that it's harder to put it together. First of all, you have to have a vehicle, a band vehicle, and here everyone's got a personal car, and band members assemble at the venue. They come together. Where even with Toronto, if we were like go to another city an hour or two away, we'd all meet at a subway station, and someone would have the van, and we'd all get in because we had a van. So I think the logistics of getting a vehicle that's roadworthy and gassing it are definitely a big part of it. I think also the way of the ska scene now, in the early mid 90s, that it was really a strong support around the country, and young people were into ska music. So if there was a band coming, you know how it was in those days. All you needed to do was put the word ska and some checkerboard on your posters, and you're walking down the street, and people are like, I see this. This is about me. This is my thing. There's a ska band coming. I'm there. I don't think it's like that these days. So the support in a world that was essentially pre-internet, when we were going around, where if you wanted music, you had to show up. And if you didn't, then you heard about it like, oh man, that was a badass show. You missed it. And you're like, I missed it. Now it's like, oh, well, I can just go and see. And 3 people have put video of it from their phones online live.
Yeah.
So the necessity for the audience to actually show up if they wanted to consume this stuff has been watered down, which means the support for the bands when they show up is harder to get. I also think that it's true for the authentic bands. They tend to have a larger membership. Harder, the more people you have, the harder it is to get people to agree this is what we're going to do and schedule things. So if you have 10 people in the band, it's harder than if you have 5. And as well, I would say in LA and Southern California now, the biggest ska scene would be, it's kind of like a ska punk scene. Basically, we used to call it, not being part of it, when these bands were coming into Blue Beat Lounge, the term we had when we first understood about the scene was Mexi ska. So it's like people from Hispanic backgrounds, usually back in the day, the backyard shows were the scene for this band. And it was like ska punk, a little bit in metal, but lots of horns and really fast and furious ska, like, Matamoska comes to mind right away, or Viennas Treses, like an older veteran act from that scene. Not from LA, but Voodoo Glow Skulls would have been really a key influence for a lot of these bands. Fast, furious, hard. It's ska, but it's not Jamaican at all. It's not really. And that scene is huge here. And there's a huge audience for it here. And even a band from Mexico can come, and there'll be thousands of people that come to see a band here, where that band doesn't have that type of following in other parts of the US. So for these bands that have a following that's so strong here, to get in a van and go somewhere where the following doesn't exactly exist because the community for it doesn't exist, makes it extra hard. There's not the people waiting with open arms in other places.
There's a lot of Latinos here.
Are you hearing me? I think
you just.
Coolie looks like he's frozen.
Just went out.
There, you're back. You're back.
I've seen the Latino ska scene here in New York, and it's pretty good. I went to go see the Sorting de Publico, and they had a lot of people here for that.
Right.
A lot of. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out how to merge these scenes together because it's separate. But I know these dudes for how many years, so it should be something that we continue to play like we used to play. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Well, I mean, Desorden Publico has been around since the 80s, right?
Yeah.
They're from Venezuela?
From Venezuela, yeah.
So we played with them. I don't know if you were in the band, but we did some shows, Toasters, King Apparatus, and Disorder
Yeah,
Publico
yeah,
together. You were in the
yeah.
band at the
I was
time?
in the back. I'm sure. Yeah.
We played a show. I don't know if you remember this at SOBs.
Yes.
It was Bedlam.
That's
That
what I'm
was
saying.
what I
This is what
remember
I'm
was
saying.
that there were the ska scene used to be, and I'm glad that it's not the same way. It used to be a lot more violent. I would straight up. I think people used to be more about fighting in public than they are now, for lots of reasons. Now, you used to be able to get away with stuff. Now everyone's like documenting it. You step out of line. There's no like, I wasn't there. My bro says I was with him. I'm good. No. But back in the day, like that stuff didn't happen. There weren't security cameras all around. And I think so people were like, and they hadn't been trained away from throwing down at the drop of a hat. And the skinhead scene, like the ska scene really was tough, I think, at a certain time, where later it became a lot more friendly. Like a band like Real Big Fish is like, I remember when I first heard that band, my things like, what I liked about ska and the specials and Jamaican music was it was kind of tough, you know. I got into aspect of it where when things were like silly or goofy, I was not as much a Madness fan as I was a Specials fan, even though Madness is awesome. But when it was silly, I'm like, that's not what I want out of it. So I think I was not alone in that. And the skinhead scene at the time, I don't think people today can understand maybe what that was like 30 years ago.
Yeah, it was more punk. It was more punk. Ska was like more punk. It was more punk.
And it was more like contemporary. Now I feel like people, I don't want even to say too much, but for somebody getting to being a skinhead now, they are adopting something that is a throwback style. That might be fair to say, where like in the late 80s, it was much more a continuous flow from the source. And it had gone this way and that way as far as the culture, but there was a lot of real tough people in that thing. Like you step into a room and you're like, I don't want to bump into that guy. Yeah. So at the show at SOBs, there were some altercations in front of the stage, even during the King Apparatus set. It wasn't a fight, but you knew it was coming. And then I don't know who said it was. I think Disorder played after us and then Toasters. But there was a straight up brawl on the dance floor. And the security moved in and they brought a bunch of people out in the road, out the side door, and like, you're out. And I stopped playing. So I went out just to see what's going on. And then the fight was continuing on the street because the security just like, you're out. Not our problem anymore. And back in the day in New York, there was no problem like having a beer in a paper bag in public, which was not the way in Canada. Mm-hmm. So there's skinheads out there with beers on the street and people are still fighting. And all of a sudden, some skinhead just picks up like a garbage can from the road and breaks the front window of SOBs with it and takes off on foot. And like 2 minutes later, there's 7 cop cars there and skinheads with beers in their hand are like getting up in the faces of cops. And I'm like, this is crazy. It was, now that kind of like roughness, I don't think exists. I don't see that stuff going on here. That's for sure. I don't know what all that tangent was about, but the ska scene was a lot tougher, I would say. And if you were in it, you really you self-identified with it, I think, more strongly maybe than people do today because there are so many options. And back in the same way, if you wanted to get some music in the 80s or the early 90s, you really had to be searching through record stores for this rare piece of vinyl. And maybe it took you 3 years and you found it and you're like, yes. Yeah. Or you had to tape a cassette from somebody you knew who had it because you couldn't just, hey, Siri, Alexa, play this, Yeah. So the point of it is like, it took dedication to be a ska fan in the early third wave. It took real work. Like you had to work hard to find the right clothing because it wasn't just, oh, I'm going to order it from docmartin.com or whatever. And you want to find the music. It was a real journey of discovery. Like, oh, this guy found this record, and now we're going to his place, literally, because he's got some cool records, and he's going to lay that on us. And we're like, wow, that's great. So I think all these things are connecting to your question about the original question was like, why don't bands from the West Coast get out to the East Coast as much? And I think it's all about the context, a larger context of what the ska scene used to be like and what it is like now, and what the scene for live bands is, period. I think of any style. It's not, people are not as geared towards seeing a band as they once were, because it used to be that was the only thing that was going on. I remember even in the days with King Apparatus, when DJs started to become a thing, people were going to clubs to see a DJ, and we were scratching our heads like, really? You're going to see someone play records? And look where that went, you know? And at the time, within a few years, we understood, wow, the popularity of DJs is actually eating into the demand for live bands. And so now there's so many things that are available at the drop of a hat that to see a band is you have to be a person that's all about seeing bands, I think, in a way that there used to be more like, oh, going to see a band is what people do.
Yeah. Live music has taken a hit with this DJ stuff. But there's still people playing music. There's still people playing music.
Oh, yeah.
And they coming to see people like yourself. You changed the game, mind you, because you changed the game, dude. You're a historic figure in the ska scene. No one was brave enough to do what you did. You were the first that had went out there with a guitar in your hand and played in front of these ska audiences. You changed the game.
I really thank you. I take a lot of satisfaction when I see people now doing solo ska and not thinking twice about it. And there's a lot of talented people.
Due to you.
Well, I think in the American ska scene, I was the first person to do it. But, you see also like back in some rare footage from Jamaica, there's like Toots, and he's got an acoustic guitar.
I understand that. But we're talking about right here in this era. It was you, bro. It was you. So listen, we're gonna sign off, and we're gonna see you again next week Saturday, same time. I believe we have Cat Bite coming on. I would really like to thank Chris Murray here for
my pleasure.
His time. It's Dan P is coming next week. My bad.
Perfect.
3:30. Another solo guy, extraordinaire. But anyway, Chris, thank you so much for coming here today, and we look forward to seeing you in June at the Supernova International Ska Festival.
Yes.
And, if I'm saying it right. But
Supernova, yeah.
Supernova. Be safe out there. This corona thing's got all of us inside the house, and that's why we're able to actually sit down with you. So be safe.
Before we go, I just want to plug, everybody's doing live streams, which is great because we're all at home, and we need to do that right now. There's no two ways about that. So a bunch of people were asking me, when are you going to do a live stream? And then Tim approached me to do this, and I felt like, well, I want this to be the first thing that I do that's of that type. And so next Thursday, I'm going to do a live stream, probably at 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern. I've already just created a little event page on Facebook, but I'm going to call it Blue Beat Live Stream. So now that we've done this, I'm going to start promoting that. So there, I'm going to play, hang out for an hour, whatever people are into, and just wanted to let you know about that.
Okay, you got 2 pages, so make sure that you get to the right page. Everything is Chris Murray, but still, make sure we get so we got the right page.
Yeah, so I got Chris Murray Music is the first personal page. Chris Murray Music 2. Both of those are pretty much up at 5,000 capacity. Then there's the artist page is Chris Murray Roots, all at Facebook.
Okay, so are they going to go into the artist page?
I haven't totally figured it out yet, honestly.
Ask John over there.
People what's working best for them.
See if John can help you out with that.
Perfect.
You got a job, John.
All right, good to see you, Coolie.
You too, Chris, man.
Okay.
All right,
Awesome.
cool. Thank you so much, Chris.
All right. Be safe, everybody.
You too, brother. Be well. We're gonna run the performance one more time for those that came in late in the room. You're gonna be watching Chris Marie here do his thing. See you guys next week Saturday, doing the same thing again with Dan P. Peace.
What's up? All right. Welcome to the first Supernova Saturday online gig. My pleasure, my privilege, my honor to be the first performer in the series. And without further ado, we do the scat. All we do is waste our time. At least if you ask our neighbors, you never see we in a factory line, sitting and pushing paper. Yeah, we do the scat. Yeah, we scat. Yeah, we scat. We do the scat. Yeah, we scat. Yeah, we scat. We do the scat. Yeah, we scat. Yeah, we scat. The scat is all we need. Headed for the big, big time. Ready to face our vultures. Signing on the dotted line. Deciding to raise our culture. Yeah, we do the scat. Yeah, we scat. Yeah, we scat. We do the scat. Yeah, we scat. Yeah, we scat. We do the scat. Yeah, we scat. Yeah, we scat. The scat is all we need. The deeper the water, the cooler the stream. The thicker the lumber, the stronger the beam. Now Rudy come lately, all over the scene, trading the black and white for green. Yeah, cause you don't know what it means. Yeah, we scat, we do the scat. Yeah, we scat. Yeah, we scat, we do the scat. Yeah, we scat. Yeah, we scat, we do the scat. Yeah, we scat. Yeah, we scat. The scat is all we need. No voice from the tower can tell me what's real. You bring your own honor, so honor the real deal. Stay would take you to the moon if you would only change your tune. Waving a mighty dollar sign, you paid and hooked the bottom line. But now we say goodbye to greed, because we life is so in seed. So red stripe and collie weed. Yeah, the scat is all we need. Yeah, we scat, we do the scat. Yeah, we scat. Yeah, we scat, we do the scat. Yeah, we scat. Yeah, we scat, we do the scat. Yeah, we scat. Yeah, we scat. The scat is all we need. Yeah, we scat, we do the scat. Yeah, we scat. Yeah, we scat, we do the scat. Yeah, we scat. Yeah, we scat, we do the scat. Yeah, we scat. Yeah, we scat. The scat is all we need. Yeah, we scat. All right. All right, nice. So we are off to a good start, I think. Everyone feeling good? Nice. So these days, we are all at home, cooped up, hopefully getting out for walks and, you know, not fully cooped up, but we are in quarantine, all of us. And it's a heavy thing. So I'm just gonna send this out to all of us, because I think love is what we need right now. It's called A Little Bit of Love. Day by day, we're on our way. Step by step, just moving forward down the road that lies ahead. Where we're going, we don't know. it's time to go, and don't look back. We got everything we need, indeed. Yes, our bags are packed. Alright, here's what we're bringing, a little bit of heart, 'cause we're gonna make a start, and a little bit of soul, 'cause now we're on a roll. Yes, a little bit of love goes a long, long way. Tell me why, when I look around me, what I see is everybody just living for themselves, chasing the almighty dollar bill. Oh, I know they will kill a man and think they've made a profit, stealing from their brothers. They're just stealing from themselves, like they don't know we're in this thing together, in this thing together now, in this world together, and a little bit of heart. We say we're gonna make a start, and a little bit of soul. We say now we're on a roll. Yes, a little bit of love goes a long, long way. Is it too much to ask for? Is it too much to dream? Too much of fantasy that everybody will take care of one another? Only one way to see, and that's if we get together. If we get together now, if we get together, so can we get together with a little bit of heart? We say we're gonna make a start, and a little bit of soul. We say now we're on a roll. Yes, a little bit of love goes a long, long way. Goes a long, long way, yes. Sure does. All right, so these days everybody's at home live streaming, which is awesome. I'm not taping this, so I'm not live streaming it, but I'm gonna do one next week, I think on Thursday, and I think also I'm gonna call it Blue Beat Live Stream. So check for that. I'm gonna put up some promo and stuff and play for about an hour, do like a bunch of stuff, maybe some surprises, some caps lock stuff, some co-writes that you guys maybe haven't heard before. I'm gonna do one right now called Food and Shelter. As a little surprise. Send this out to my good friend Atsushi from New Zealand, from Japan, who's like a vagabond ska minstrel. We wrote this together a while back. In the time of our ancestors, a time of earth and sky and water, lived the hunter and the farmer, a simple life of food and shelter, food and shelter. Every day was the day, and we were in it all the way, as the sunlight brought the day, moonlight brought night. All we needed was food and shelter, food and shelter. Got to have food and shelter. What is lost and what is gained, when what is faded does not remain? Lived the hunter and the farmer, a simple life of food and shelter, food and shelter. Got to have food and shelter, got to have food and shelter, and shelter. Indeed. So I hope you enjoyed that. And I'm going to finish off with one I know you've heard before, and I know you're going to feel it in a different way today, because I'm going to do home, and I think a lot of people watching this right now are at home. So spin it however you need to do, and I'll see you soon. Be healthy, be safe, be responsible, and we're going to be okay. I've raised the dust on 10,000 streets, worshipped the earth with the soles of my feet. I've rolled around all the days of my life, headed for someone, somewhere to arrive. I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home, but home has gone away. Young head foolish, young heart unwise, I left my home for the world outside. Much too late, I realized my home was always in your eyes. I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home, but home has gone away. I'm here 1 minute, then the next I'm gone. When I get that feeling, then I'm moving on. Don't feel much like hanging around, 'cause what I'm looking for I ain't found. I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home, but home has gone away. Yeah. Country lanes and city lights, they smell so sweet and they shine so bright. There's so much in this world to see, and every place is calling me. But I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home, but home has gone away. I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home, but home has gone away. All right, Supernova Saturday. Rock on.